right there. Every city has got a skyline. If you want to take an awesome skyline shot, we're going to show you what to do right here. This is just absolutely beautiful. Look at this view of all these buildings. It's gorgeous. One shot that I like to do in a situation like this is actually have a dancer or a person, it doesn't even have to be a dancer, standing and looking at the skyline, and you shoot from behind. Two challenges when shooting a skyline. One, that often there's a railing that just gets in your way. And two, that sometimes you're really far away from the city. So in this section, I want you to focus on depth of field and focal length. Composition, I'm gonna put Rachel in the center of the frame at the bottom third in between these two posts with a bunch of skyline in the background. Lighting. We've been in New York City for 3 days shooting this workshop. I haven't seen one moment of sunlight. It's been overcast the whole time. This is the same situation. It's actually absolutely great for photos like this, and here's why. If it was bright sun right now, it would be a lot of shadows and contrast, and this would be blown out. But because the light is even, you can get a really good skyline shot. So when you're doing skyline shots, either go first thing in the morning, late afternoon if it's sunny, or you can go any time of day if it's cloudy. In this particular spot, here's a challenge with the light. Even though it's overcast and even, it is much brighter in the background than it is right here because of these trees and buildings. So what's happening here is the sun is over there, it's being blocked a lot by the trees and building, and as a result, look at me, my face here is shadowed. If you look at me this way, my face here is lit. So what's happening is the background is way brighter than the light that's going to be on the dancer. So what you want to do is actually expose your camera for the background. And then the subject is going to be a little dark, and then when you work on it in post-production, you can brighten the subject. But if you expose for the subject, meaning brighten it up enough that I look good, the background is going to be washed out. It's going to be too bright. Angle. Because of this railing here, I got to make a decision. Usually for a shot like this, because it's about the feet and the legs, I would go low and showcase that. But if I go low, all I'm going to see is this railing. If I go too high, it's going to make her small in the frame. So I'm going to do it all three ways and let you guys decide what you think is best. Pose. For this, I think something really simple and beautiful. I just want her to be standing there looking at the skyline like anybody would and just have a really pretty ballet pose on point. I think sometimes choosing a more subtle pose is a lot more effective than trying to do something crazy. When you have the setting this gorgeous, you don't want to detract from it by trying to do too much. Now's a good moment to explain how to set your exposure in your camera. There's two things you can do. Number one, you can set the camera to automatic and then move the lens to the point where you're exposing for, in this case, the background, the cityscape, and see the settings, adjust those manually to that setting. So for example, if it's at shutter speed of 500th of a second, you could then manually adjust it to 500th of a second. So when you move back and you put the subject in the frame, it's not going to change the exposure. Let me clarify what I meant by exposing for the background. I basically mean that, especially if you're using a mirrorless camera where you can see the exposure change as you make an adjustment to your dial, I want you to look into the camera and adjust the shutter speed until you can see detail in the background. At that point, you've got the proper exposure. It doesn't have to be just the shutter speed. It can be that you're adjusting the aperture or the ISO. But in this case, I had the ISO very low already and the aperture set to what I wanted it to be, so the shutter speed was the variable. The shutter speed was the variable because the image was static, so I didn't need a high shutter speed to capture movement. If you don't have a mirrorless camera, then you can't see the exposure automatically. You have to take the photo and review the exposure. So you would take a photo, and then you would see, can I see detail in the background? If no, then what you do is you look at that setting and then you manually adjust the shutter speed until you get the proper exposure upon review. Okay, Rachel, I want you to turn around, look straight at the skyline. All right, that's beautiful. First thing I will see is a huge railing. That's a killer for a skyline photo because all we're gonna see is this railing. I'll show you what I mean. Now, we've got these two beams here, right? These are actual factors. You don't wanna just ignore this and put her anywhere. You wanna either center her in between the two or put her in front of one. But it's a compositional decision. Just don't put her anywhere. So I'll put her in between them, okay? So I want you to center between exactly those two. Now, if I go straight at her right here, you can see, I'll probably see that blue roof over there, which I don't think is a good look. So I'm actually gonna angle it this way so I can see this part of the city and crop out that blue. So always look for every aspect of your composition and then give me a really pretty shot of you on point. But remember, you gotta get right in the center, so move that way and in. Oh, that's too many inches. Right there. That's centered between the two. Dancer pose to be looking right at the skyline. Gorgeous. Now let me go a little bit lower, okay? Hold it. Wow, and then higher. Stay there again. So this first skyline shot I was struggling with a little bit. As you could see, the railing was a big factor in this photo. It takes up more of the frame than the city itself. So I was trying to work with that. And the first way I tried to work with it is by changing up the angle. But if I went too low, I didn't see any of the city. And if I went too high, it was making her too small in the frame. So now we've come down lower to the water, and you'll notice one thing right off the bat. The skyline is higher because we're not looking down on it or straight onto it, we're looking from below. That's the first thing. Second thing, there's still a railing. So you gotta deal with the railing. However, this railing is lower and actually more aesthetically pleasing than the initial railing was, so I'm gonna show you how to incorporate a railing into a photo. As you'll see, now that we're right here, the light is better on us because we don't have the trees and the building obstructing the light, so it's gonna be more even with the background than it was up top. Okay, Rachel. Come here. I want you to be under here, centered once again, and then do some sort of hingy thing with your back really low, over your foot, right, and stay under this. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep her on the lower third of the frame, underneath the railing, and then put the background of the city behind her. Oh my gosh, okay, look at this, guys. Now this time I got her position right and she is centered in between those two beams, so I love it. Also, the railing is exactly right at the horizon line of the city, and the city in the background looks great because it's slightly blurry, but it's not totally out of focus. Even though it's subtle, this tells a really beautiful story. And now it's time to try this photo with a phone. I think it's gonna look great because the light is even. Most phones have a wide angle lens, a standard, and a zoom. I'm gonna try the standard, which is very similar to the 50mm. I'm on my knees for this reason. I want the railing to be below the buildings. If I go too low, the railing is gonna be obstructing the buildings, and if I go too high, I'm shooting from above her, which is not flattering for this pose. So I'm gonna go right here so the railing is below the buildings, but yet I can still see her. All right, go ahead, Rachel. I'm gonna put her in the bottom third, and I'm gonna go straight onto her. I'm gonna go this way. There we go. And now, just for fun, I'm gonna do the zoom on the iPhone. Go again. I'm gonna go back a little. Oh, that's the shot, guys. The zoom. Wow. Like, that's seriously, that's just as nice as the Nikon. Now what's happening in this case is because you can't really adjust the aperture, it doesn't much matter because it's so far away. When you zoom in, it blurs it out naturally anyway. Your phone can work exceptionally well under certain circumstances, especially when there's even light on an overcast day. What I meant by zoom was I zoomed my camera phone into ×2, which is the most telephoto my iPhone 11 goes. However, every phone is different. But what I meant by that is the more you zoom in and it compresses the image with a phone, the closer it gets to a professional looking camera. So my tip is almost always use the zoom feature on your phone. Obviously look at it and see what you're comfortable with, but that makes it look more professional because it tends to compress the background a little and blur things out a little bit. My biggest issue with an iPhone is that you can't control the aperture, so everything is always in focus, and you can avoid that somewhat by zooming in. Composition, I wanted to put Rachel on the lower third, using this to separate it, and then the buildings are the top 2/3 of the frame. Light, it's a very overcast blue day. You want to try and set your camera settings to the light that you have. I usually use auto color because the camera does it for me. Angle, I usually go low, but if I go too low, Rachel will actually be blocking the buildings, so I want to be high enough that I see her and the building. pose. I want to take advantage of Rachel's extremely awesome back flexibility by having her bend down below this railing. And now this is a really awesome section of this class. I want to show you a bunch of dance poses that you can use with your dance. Okay, Caroline has incredible leg flexibility, so we're gonna showcase that, but I need her to change from her blue leggings because look at the buildings. They're very blue as well. So her leg is likely gonna disappear into the background, but if she's wearing something bright, it'll pop. As you can see, it's starting to get a little brighter out here. The sun is trying to break through the clouds, so we'll see if we get to show you some natural sunlight one of these days, but in the meantime, we're gonna use Caroline here and showcase her incredible leg flexibility. So watch first just the photo, and then I'm gonna build it into a story. Okay, ready? And right there. You can choose whether or not you want the dancer to look at the camera or tell a story by looking at the skyline. Both work. Now, I'm gonna teach you guys all about aperture. Now I'm going to do a portrait of Caroline with 4 different apertures to show you the difference. F2, F4, F8, and F16. Aperture, initially I was shooting at f1.8 like I always like to do, but I was noticing something. That when it was focused on Caroline and her arm was here, the phone was slightly out of focus. So I moved it to f2.8 to keep both her and the phone in focus while blurring out the background. It's really bright out here, even though it's overcast, which allows me to keep a really high shutter speed, which will freeze any action because on a tilt jump like that, it whacks really quickly, so you gotta have a fast shutter speed. And since it's really bright, I had a very low ISO. I already tested all the different focal lengths, all the different lenses with Rachel, and I had decided that the 50mm was my favorite version for a skyline photo. I see a lot of comments on my YouTube videos asking me what this is. This is not a camera accessory. This is a GoPro. It's here so we can get my perspective for the video when I'm shooting photos.